Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the workshop City of Griffin Board of Commissioners, October 27, 2020. First time to discuss the interlocal cooperation agreement establishing the Griffin Spalding County Land Bank Authority. Deputy City Manager Jesse O'Connor will address. Good morning.
Good morning. How are y'all this morning? All right, so we have a couple different things to discuss this morning. The first being it's not on. It's not on. Okay. All right, we're going to start with the interlocal cooperation agreement for the Land Bank Authority. If you'll remember back in, I think it was July or August, we came in and talked about two different things for the land bank that needed to be updated. The first being the MOU for property maintenance, and we did that a couple weeks ago, so that's good to go. But now we need to go back through the interlocal cooperation agreement that established the Land Bank Authority. This was done back in 2008. I think Ms. Bartholomew is going to be able to go through this on your screen so you can see the changes to it. My changes are in red, Ms. Church's changes are in blue. And so once you all approve it, we will then be able to send it over to the county, or the land bank will send it over to the county to discuss with them these changes as well. There's not a ton of them, but I will sort of walk you through them as we go. First is just sort of updating how we're going to word the adoption of the agreement. And again, the current agreement, the interlocal cooperation agreement, tells us how we have to amend it, which is why this one is particularly called amended and restated, because the current agreement says that is how you shall amend it. So that's why the name has changed to amended and restated interlocal agreement to establish the Griffin Spalding County Land Bank Authority. We can keep going, Ms. Bartholomew. Okay, we did remove the definition of appraisal to change it to what we actually use. We do not go out and get to disinterested persons certified as real estate appraisers because it would cost more money than the land is worth. So what Ms. Church has done and what the Land Bank Authority has approved is that they go in and use the tax assessed value. They then have a price based on what that tax assessed value is that they're willing to sell it for at the minimum. So we just changed appraisal to read that way. We wanted to remove it, but we found out that the state law actually has that terminology in there that you have to have done an appraisal before you're able to sell it. So we're leaving that and just saying that we're using the tax assessed appraised value. So that's the definition changing there. We'll keep going. We also took out low income and moderate income. If you'll remember in a few articles, there was some discussion that you all were to set what that meant each calendar year. We don't do that. We sort of know where we are. It wanted us to look at the census. It wanted us to look at all different kinds of things for city to establish what that meant inside the city limits, and also what county, what they wanted it to mean outside of the county based on those census numbers. It's something that we've never done. We don't feel like we need to start doing it. It's not a requirement from state law, so we went ahead and removed those definitions since we're not going to be using them. All right, if you'll keep going. The next one is in Article 3. It used to be that they were a 4-member board. They would like for us to make them a 5-member board. They were allowed to do this in 2012, and we've never gone around to doing it. With that change would mean that the city is able to appoint to you, the county is able to appoint to you, and then the 5th member would be nominated by the school board and would have to be a joint nomination from both the city and the county based on that nomination from the school board. So it would be a joint appointment between city and county for that school board member. If you'll remember now, the school board appointment rotates each 4-year term. So right now, Mr. Smith is our appointment for the school board, so we only have one true city appointment. So this will give you 2 city appointments, 2 county appointments, and then that 5th member will always be by recommendation or nomination of the school board, and then will have to be jointly agreed upon between city and county. Do you have a question there?
And in discussion, we're talking about possibly having a city staff member and a county staff member. I think some of this.
We have talked about that. I did not put it in this particular agreement because it's up to y'all anyway as to who that appointment is. Right now, Brett Haynes, who is our building official, was just nominated to fill Ms. Gardner's spot. All of these terms expire at the end of this year, so you will have 5 appointment opportunities if this is approved. We are asking that this take effect January 1st, so that way you will have that 5th member, so you do get 2 true appointments. And as with the county, I assume that because he's just been appointed in the last couple months that they will continue and he'll remain an appointee for next year, but I don't know that for sure. Right now, you currently have Ms. Patty Beckham as your other appointment along with Mr. Smith. And then Ms. Gardner's spot was filled with Brett Haynes, and then also Newton Galloway is the county's other appointment. I assume he will remain as well, but I don't know that either. All right, we'll keep going. We did remove just the information about the alternating basis of the appointment from the school board, which we've already discussed. Okay, and then also Ms. Church added about the chairperson. They do appoint one at the beginning of the year, and so that is listed now in section B, and this is on page, thank you, that's much better. On page 6 now. All right, we'll keep going. We didn't change anything in powers of the authority, acquisition of property. There's just a couple, if you'll go, wait a minute, back up. We're way too far down.
Too far down,
Yeah, so we're in Article 5. Okay, there's a couple changes here, just mainly, there were times when we tried to define the parties of city and county that sometimes the county was not capitalized all the way through, or sometimes the city was not, so we did make sure to make that grammatical change, but nothing actually of substance changing. Article 6, the administration of properties, we did, at one point, we wanted to take out that they were being appraised, but again, because that is a requirement, that sentence in section B, number 1, reads exactly from state law, so we didn't feel like we needed to remove the appraised portion of that sentence, so we just added in our definition of how we're using the appraised value, and it wasn't otherwise defined in state law, so we do feel like we can do it that way. You'll go to section C in that same article. We removed this. This is, again, where our boards, city and county boards, are supposed to designate low income and moderate income, but again, we think that at this rate, the way that we're sort of operating the land bank authority is by selling to adjoining property owners or selling to someone that's going to make sure that it's owner occupied. We don't need right now that definition, so we are recommending that that be removed. Article 7, again, just some changes to how county is worded, Board of Commissioners of the county. We'll keep going. The last part of B, the criteria for conveyance, I did add in that we are requiring that it be owner occupied. Mr. Galloway sent me some comments late Sunday night suggesting that we not have that in there because there have been opportunities where, at least we know one time, I think, that they sold to somebody that wasn't going to owner occupy and knew that they weren't going to owner occupy, and that was a townhome in Carrington Village. 95% of the time they have done an owner occupancy requirement. So it's just a pleasure of the board as to whether you agree to allow them to handle that through their authority, or if you want it delineated specifically in this interlocal cooperation agreement, because there are instances, very few, but there has been an instance already where they have said that there's no way they're going to have an owner occupier, so they wanted to just get rid of it. Does anybody have any?
What about situations to square up maybe adjoining properties or something?
Well, and that's why she added in on which a primary dwelling structure stands. So that way, if it is an adjoining property that maybe we've already demolished the structure, it's just vacant land, it doesn't have to be if that maybe landlord wants to buy it to make that property more in conformance with our zoning ordinance, they could, even though it's a tenant occupied structure, as long as that property is vacant that they're asking to acquire.
Would there just be room for that case by case, or no?
If we remove it from here, then yes, the authority would be able to decide case by case what they wanted to do, but we have, and we still have an adopted resolution that y'all approved probably a year and a half ago now that says that that is what we are asking them to do, but you do not have the authority to require that unless it's within this agreement. So it's either up to you all to say, no, we want that as a requirement, which gives them no room to sell to somebody that's not an owner occupier.
I think I'll be comfortable leaving it.
Okay,
That's what I was gonna ask, because when you say there are instances, how is that even shaped? Or if, because going through that property list, there are a lot of properties that don't look like they'll be owner occupied.
right. So that's sort of where we are at this point. Do we want the land bank to be something that sells to anybody at any time? In the past, we have said no, because we feel like we'll be right back into the position where it becomes a substandard house, we're here to demolish. So we have been willing to sort of supply their operating expenses, because they're not going to make a bunch of money holding what they're holding now if they're waiting for an owner occupier or an adjoining property owner to buy it. So if we're okay with that, then we can proceed with this provision within this cooperation agreement. If we want them to start making more money, then we need to release that restriction and allow them to sell to maybe a developer or somebody that's going to want to rent it. But that, at this point, is.
I'm not okay with that, because a lot of the properties are in the areas that are already high rental rate.
Mhm.
And that doesn't do anything to attack or adjust that high rental rate in those neighborhoods. So I would prefer that we still require it be owner sales to owner occupied. That's me.
And if some point someone came in with a master plan, they could always come back for an amendment or something, or both boards could agree on.
Yeah, I'm sure that we could come back and on maybe a case-by-case basis. They just have to get approval from both you and the county. Now, and again, this is, you're agreeing to this, the county's also going to have to agree to it.
Right.
Because they also have to approve this agreement. So both of you all have adopted resolutions saying that that's what you want to happen, but it's not really enforceable unless it's within this agreement. It hasn't been problematic so far, and they have done it, except for that one occasion that I know of, and I'm pretty sure that's it. But if we want to ensure that that continues to happen, then this is the only way to enforce that. They're doing it through deed restrictions, which I think is still how they'll do it, is to put some kind of restrictive covenant on the deed that says this property now has to be owner occupied. So that way, if somebody wants to buy it and they know that they're just gonna flip it, they only can sell it to an owner occupier if they come in and do the work and then sell it. They can sell that, but they have to sell it to an owner occupant. Yes,
The original sales price is gonna be determined by tax records,
yes, sir.
and they will have to adhere to that before they can sell.
Well, no, not really. They can sell it for whatever price they want to at that point. The Land Bank Authority will have to adhere to it. Yes. Is that what you're asking?
No, the land bank authority, that's one we're concerned with.
Yes, the Land Bank Authority will have to adhere to, I think, this church here. They've adopted a policy as to how they sell. They were just selling, somebody would make an offer and they would just look at it case by case and say yes or no based on that offer. What they were realizing is they weren't even making their cost back. So they were not only not making any money whatsoever, they weren't even covering costs. So Ms. Church has gone in and she does now called a minimum recommendation from staff, where she uses the tax assessed value of that property, and I think it's at the minimum 25% of that value, or whatever their costs are, whichever is lower. So if you're buying a piece of property from the land bank, you're getting it for way less than what even the tax assessed value may be, whether it's a vacant lot or a structure on it. But they very rarely do they go below that minimum recommendation. They can, from what I can tell, but they don't often. So if somebody comes in and say they offer $500 and the property's worth $4,000 according to the tax assessed value, then Ms. Church has on their agenda item that her minimum recommendation is $1,000. Most of the time, they will vote to counter offer and say they have to give us $1,000 if they want this property. So that's what they do currently. And I don't think they're planning to change that at all. They just wanted to make sure that the definition that was contained in this agreement matches what they actually do. All right, any other questions so far? Okay, we'll keep going. D is something that is changing and I think needs to be pointed out. This is disbursement of sales proceeds. Currently, and I'm sorry, it gets a little confusing when you're trying to do it this way and make a match. Number 1 says they will go to the parties in the Griffin Spalding County School District in proportion to and to the extent of their respective tax bills and costs. we're really not doing that anyway. It goes to the authority to recover its expenses because we're not even covering, well, we are now, but just recently started recovering their expenses. So we're saying you can keep that to recover your expenses. And then number two, it will go to the parties. So if there's any excess, let's say that they do sell that lot for $1,500 instead of that $1,000. If the land bank only had $500 in it, then the city, county, and school board would split that extra $1,000 in whatever proportion that we're putting into, or into the extent of our respective tax bills. So we do get checks every once in a while from the land bank saying, here's your portion of whatever that sale is. They're normally not for very much, but we are starting to see where we're getting some reimbursement back. The third would be to the authority. If there's anything left after tax bills, we have, I think, maybe seen that one time with the sale of those lots out of the undeveloped subdivision in the county. So unfortunately, the city did not see it, but the county saw an actual profit from that. They were able to get their entire tax bill back, and the authority was able to keep some for their operating expenses, so that was good. And then to the county and city, in such proportions as we contribute to the land bank. So we split 50-50. So if after all of that, we have recovered expenses for the land bank authority, the county and city have gotten our tax bills paid, and then the authority has kept it to further its operations, then lastly, we can split those profits 50-50 if there are any left. This could come up soon, and if Ms. Bartholomew, I hate to do this to you, but can we go to the map?
While she's doing that, I want to remind you, we've got a new soundboard from the last meeting that we're kind of working with, so be sure your mic is like right in front of you, and if you speak, be sure and speak into your mic, as we learn this new soundboard. Thank you.
Okay, so what I've asked Mr. Haynes with GIS to do is come in and map the properties that the city and county own. We did not differentiate who owned it, city versus county. Those are sort of the greenish brown tan color. And then also what the land bank owns. And we differentiated what the land bank owns with what they own because they foreclosed the right to redeem, so nobody can come back in without a legal action and get the property back. That's in blue. And then in orange is what they own but have not yet foreclosed the right to redeem because either they just got it within the last year at a tax sale, or right now they have a backlog of about 40 properties that they're waiting to foreclose the right to redeem, but because of the backlog in court, they haven't been able to do that. So you can sort of see, if you look maybe up at Lexington and Kentucky, you can see there's a lot of property that the land bank has title to, and it's surrounded by city and county property. That's a good area for redevelopment that you could possibly market to a developer. If that were to happen, then maybe you will see from some of these disbursements and sales proceeds that profit coming back into the city and county. Also, if you'll scroll over to Edgewood and D.F. Fuller, and it doesn't look like a lot, I hate that, but we're doing as much of the city and the county as you can on a map. And so it really is a lot of property that we have the ability to market or hold, use for parks, use for whatever public purpose we think might be necessary in that area or advantageous to us. So,
Can we start there?
Yeah, okay.
Sorry. You said these are properties. Does it distinguish if there's a structure there or not? Or?
no, we didn't go that in depth.
Okay.
Now, the list does. If you go back to the list, which was the attachment before this, it will tell you vacant, structure, and then somewhat the condition of the structure versus the condition of the land even. So if y'all remember correctly, we bought a bunch of the property on Edgewood Avenue, the shotgun houses from Mr. Glover. There is, on West College Street, a couple of lots that are owned by the Land Bank Authority outright at this point. And then to the south of Edgewood Avenue, even though they're not in color, those are held by one owner as well, the Griffin Land Trust. I'm not sure exactly their name.
Let me just clarify so I can make sure I'm reading it. The yellowish color is city or county owned. What is the blue?
The blue means that the Land Bank Authority has already foreclosed that right to redeem.
And the orange is.
They
still
have not yet. So they
Okay.
still have that legal action to take to make sure that the person that lost at the tax sale can't come back and get it. Now, that doesn't mean even in blue that they couldn't file a petition sort of contesting our title, or the land bank's title,
Mhm.
but it's a lot more effort than just paying back those taxes.
Gotcha, okay.
So that's sort of what you're looking at. I know y'all asked for a map, and it's, sort of hard to realize how much you have together, but if you look in those particular areas, even up sort of at the top of the center, Williams and Bell and all through there, the land bank has a lot of lots, vacant lots, as well as, I think there's a couple structures back there that we're working on right now. One on Bell Street actually that they have that needs to be demolished. So in those kind of instances, when we're keeping up with the property well, we can work so much better, because I don't need to take 448 Bell Street through a demolition in court because land bank owns it. I can just say, Ms. Church, this property is in, dilapidated condition. We need you to come in and fill out a demo permit, and we can move through the process much quicker in that regard.
Right, and looking at this, it looks to me, just comparing it to, I know we didn't have a map before, just looking more to the idea of the block revitalization is starting to come together, is what we're doing.
Yep, that's what we're trying to do. So, we've asked Ms. Church, and she's done a good job. Unfortunately, tax sales have not been able to happen as often as we wanted this year, but in the past couple ones, she's been able to go in and say, where are the areas that we actually have property, both city, county, and land bank, and housing authority. That's one thing we did not add to here, and we should have. I'll see if I can get Mr. Haynes to update it to include theirs, because they also have a lot of property that shows just how much we're sort of being able to gather and what critical masses and what areas we have so that we can figure out development strategies. I think you all are aware of the Park District where the Housing Authority built the terraces. A lot of that Westbrook and Scales area is either now controlled by city, Housing Authority, and the land bank has some as well. So there's a few different areas that are definitely becoming ripe for redevelopment, which is why we've also come to y'all and said we've got to get our infill ordinances in line, while we've got to get this in line. So that's what we're working towards. And I just wanted y'all to see sort of the different areas within this map that really are getting close to being able to do that.
If I can just make a comment, this is kind of an aside, but since we're looking at the map, if we look at that area, the Bell Street area, Turner Street, I want you guys to imagine how impactful it is when you have that many properties in a neighborhood that aren't being maintained with the grass cut or various other things that we've complained about. It may not be so bad in a neighborhood where in a 4 or 5 block span, there's only one property. But when you look at an area like that and there's that much color and there's that many lots that aren't being cut, that aren't being cleared, that are having trash dumped on them, that's very impactful to the people that live there as well as anyone coming through interested in development. So we talked about it before. We have the arrangement with the Housing Authority to maintain the property, but looking at this map, I hope it gives you a more visual perspective of when we're saying this street looks really bad, this block looks really bad. When you've got 8 lots on one street and they're not maintained, it makes the neighborhood really uncomfortable for the people that live there. And so it's not an anomaly. You've got areas of the city that are heavily concentrated with these land bank properties that are being neglected and thus making it look like we've come in or that some organization has come in and removed the structures from the neighborhood and then walked away and left it in disarray for the people that live there. So I know that's not what we're talking about, but since we're looking at the map, I think it's really powerful to see that you're talking about 4 or 5 blocks and there's that many properties that aren't being maintained consistently.
Well, and to your point, Commissioner Flowers, that's one of the reasons we brought all of this back, because we were having such a hard time keeping up with, and it's always during the summer that happens, but we were having such a hard time keeping up with the properties that we were supposed to be maintaining because the right of redemption had been foreclosed. Keep in mind those that where the right of redemption has not been foreclosed, we cannot enter that property. We are a trespasser just as much as somebody that doesn't own the property is. So those in orange, we're sort of stuck. So, but it is good to know, and that's why we needed to update that MOU in regards to the property maintenance, so that our contractor there knew exactly what needed to be cut, what he could cut, what the city needed to cut, so on and so forth. Because some of these were able to go in with Dr. Keller's equipment, and really sort of rip it out so that it looks good and we're starting fresh. But when we do that, grass grows quicker. So it's, you know, it's sort of just a cause and effect where you tear the house down, that's great, but then you leave a vacant lot, you gotta keep it up. If you clear it out, then you gotta cut the grass. I mean, it's something that has to be maintained and just monitored constantly. So this was the other point of bringing this all back up, is that it is not easy to do, which is why, to me, it is so important that acquisition of property from the land bank happen in a manner that is beneficial for everyone, not just let's acquire as much as we can. If we're gonna get something off on West Poplar Street and nothing else is there, it's really not helping anything. Unless we know that there's a property owner that says, hey, if you get this lot, I'll buy it from you because I wanna adjoin it. That's about the only situation I see that they need to be going and buying just ones and twos if there's nothing else that anybody owns in that area.
Yeah, I mean, they're, next to each one of these blue squares is somebody's house.
Mhm.
People live next to these lots that are leaving unkempt for various reasons, not just out of neglect, whether it's time constraints or money constraints. And so there are certain areas of the city where no one's really going to call a complaint. But if you're back in this Bell Street area, you might have 30 people calling complaining because, hey, the lot next to me, there's rats coming out of it, there's snakes coming out of it, there's trash on it, there's various other things. And so I can see where if you live in certain parts of the city, that's not really an experience that you have. But if you live in these areas where it's very colorful, I just want you guys to understand that people live next to these blue squares on this map. These are not isolated areas. These are high traffic areas. There's children playing, there's traffic, there's various other things going. And then you're out to ride by and there's 4 feet of grass and who knows what else on the lot. So as we continue to discuss that, I just want you guys to keep this in mind that these are actual neighborhoods where people live next to these empty lots.
And to piggyback on that, I think it's quite important that we all understand that we are elected by districts, but we all represent the entire city. These people may not be able to vote for you, but they are still, no decision can be made without a majority of this board. So though this may not touch your area, this may not have anything to do with the district in which you represent, these are still people in our city that we need to take seriously, especially what Ms. Flowers is talking about.
Well, I think too, we have to remember that the whole purpose of the land bank was to foster the public purpose of returning land, which is in a non-revenue generating, non-tax producing status, to an effective utilization status. So we're sort of at that point where we've acquired a lot. Now we gotta figure out how to make it effective. How are we gonna use it again? How are we gonna get it back on the tax digest so that we can make this an effective utilization to provide affordable housing, new trade, commerce, industry, et cetera. So by putting that restriction that it be owner occupied in there, I think that's great, and y'all know how I feel about that. But you know, we're doing it a little bit differently than some other land banks have done, which is why that is a little bit harder to accomplish. And I'm not suggesting that we need to change that. I think it needs to be that way because otherwise I don't think it will be an effective utilization of that property eventually. It'll be right back to where we were. But just realize that's why it's a little bit harder in our situation than it is in others that have land banks, because we're putting that restriction in there at the beginning. And I think in the long run, the places that we've already seen it happen and we see how well it's working. So when we see that that owner occupant now has that house and he's living there and he's keeping it up, the area in that neighborhood continues to gain some more pride of ownership, gain some more neighborhood value, and that's what we want. But just remember, that's the whole purpose of the land bank, is to get these back on the tax digest. So we're just having to make sure we make that balance appropriately.
Okay, sorry for the tangent.
No, I think that was perfect.
And maybe this will be addressed further down in the agreement, but even though we've had a land bank for all these years, it's never gotten to a point where it looked at redevelopment or anything. You know, that my understanding was that was the goal and idea, but we've never gotten to that.
Right, not in a major way, no. But I think we are getting closer to that. Again, looking in some of those areas in the map, we have that Lexington, Kentucky area, especially what the county's doing in Fairmont. That's a big potential, and then as well as what we acquired in Edgewood and what they own sort of around that area. And then the Park District where the Housing Authority is. I think those are really your big three at this point. So we just have to make that next step to decide how we want to market it. We need this church to go to those tax sales and get anything else she can in those areas. And let's make that some concentration. I think having, as Mayor Holberg mentioned, staff or somebody that's at those meetings that can say, this is what the city's doing, here's where we need your help. And Mr. Haynes knows exactly what's going on in these areas. So I think he's a good fit, even though he is the county appointee, he works just as much with us in our substandard program and in property maintenance. So I think he'll be a good voice of for us as well as for the county.
Sorry.
That's okay. All right, now we're back to the agreement, please. I think it's not page 15, which was the original one. Article 8 is development of properties conveyed by the authority. There we go.
Look back up.
So B, I just wanted to point out that nothing, I don't think, there we go, changed here, except that I wanted to point out they do have a time limit for development. So in talking with Ms. Wyndham a couple weeks ago, Mr. Galloway, it's almost to that point with some of these where they haven't started development, which means the land bank will be taking that property back. So I just want to point that out to y'all. It's not that we want it to sit as a vacant lot unless it's one of those that is an adjoining property owner and we said, no, you need to combine it and replat it so that it is one lot. Then we're coming up on some time limits where they might be taking property back because nobody's done anything with it. So I just wanted to point that out where it might make it to your ears.
Is that in here somewhere like a designated time?
Yeah, so in that section B, if you, it has to be, they have to start within a year. And if they have not, then that right of revision will be granted to the authority and but the authority is gonna have to take some steps to make that happen. It's just not gonna happen automatically. So I think that's what Ms. Wyndham was pointing out the other day. If you'll keep going down, I think that's just a formatting thing. Article 10. This is their staffing, and it used to be that the city, according to this, the city and county had to approve their staffing. We've never actually done that, so we just removed that provision. The authority has always decided who they hire, how they terminate, anything along those lines. So there wasn't really a point in putting that in here if that's not what we're going to do. So we did remove that. You'll keep going. C, under Article 10, the outside consultants, it just says that they have the ability to hire outside consultants, and they added in the authority there as well. You'll keep going down. I think that's about it. Management of funds. We took out the audit part. They have to conduct an audit, but we're not paying for it. So they agreed with that. We haven't done that in the past. So we just removed that it goes back and forth between city and county auditors to actually match what we do now, which is they do their own audit. They did use Malden and Jenkins for this audit, so I'm not sure if they'll continue to do that. But in our case, we don't believe that we really need to have a say-so in that as long as they're doing an audit. So that's how that reads now. And the last one is just the duration of this agreement. This is where we're sort of getting into more just rules of construction type stuff. So I think that is about it. Does anybody have any questions? So we have a consensus to make our recommendation that the deed restriction is actually contained within this document as well for owner occupancy.
I mean, yes.
Okay, okay, all right,
Thank you. Any questions? Good job.
thank you.
Is that one of the documents that goes along with service delivery strategy as well, or is it separate since it's in the future?
It's not currently, if I remember correctly, the Land Bank Authority is not currently listed in our service delivery strategy, but it is one of the contracts that Ms. Arizari and I said needs to be added. It's
We would
interesting.
relook at it in the 2022 timeframe.
Yes, and it's interesting that you mentioned that. One of the things that I had highlighted in here is Article 11, which is funding and expenditures. It talks about the establishment of their budget, and it says that the portions that are requested from each party, being the city and county, need to be equitably apportioned based on reasonable principles of tax equity to avoid double taxation. Just food for thought on that one.
All right. That was exciting.
Okay.
Moving on to discuss updates to the Griffin Code of Ordinances and the Unified Development Code. Deputy City Manager Jessica Powell.
Okay, we're not gonna go through this sentence by sentence, but I sort of wanted to give y'all a heads up as to what we as staff has been doing for the past 10 months, I think. They enjoy it so much, but every first Friday of the month, we sit down and we go through our code. We have finished the Code of Ordinances and we are starting on the Unified Development Code next Friday. So the staff themselves have, if it's their ordinance, then they have had to present it. And what we have found is there are a lot of things within our ordinance that are old. Maybe the designation is not correct for whomever is actually handling whatever the code is discussing. Maybe there's some grammatical errors. Maybe it's something that doesn't even need to be within the code and it just needs to be adopted by reference and is actually a policy. Maybe it's an overhaul completely that needs to happen, and I think that'll happen more so with the Unified Development Code than anywhere else. But I wanted to sort of point out a few to you because what I would like to do is if it's just some of those little changes where it's changing the title of whomever actually handles the maybe alcohol license, or if it's just a grammatical change, we're just gonna bring those at a nighttime meeting and just have them on the agenda. So you'll start seeing those in the next few months where we have gone through, made those changes, and then are asking that you approve them. There are some though, like the alcohol ordinance, where Mr. Whalen and I need to sit down with Ms. Bennett and Mr. Jacobs and go through because of legislation that was passed at the state level and decide what we want to amend and adopt into our ordinance as well. So those kind of things you will still see at a workshop, but we normally don't bring y'all a lot of changes to our code unless we talk to you about it first at a workshop. So I did want you to see that and think, well, what exactly are they changing? We'll still have, of course, sort of red line like we do now, but I won't go through it word by word unless there are questions about it because some of it's just going to be very, very generic grammatical stuff. Big stuff we'll still bring to you at the workshop. So just for example, we went through the charter first, of course. There are a couple of things that we noticed in here that are, I think, really just sort of old. We can change by home rule, meaning we do not have to go to the legislature and have their approval or do anything like that. But for example, there's some stuff about the elections in here. We don't reference the contract that we have with Ms. Hollins, so we probably want to put that in here. That's not going to be anything that changes, I don't think, through the legislator. I think we can do that here.
Ms. Hollins or you said elections?
Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Ridley. So I was looking at that and thinking something else. So those kind of changes, we just need to sort of update to make sure that we're providing exactly what's happening in here. There are no questions about how we're collecting taxes or how we're handling elections. In section 2, let's see, you've got yours. I think that might be about it in the charter, but if you go to maybe 5.2.
In the charter?
Yes, ma'am. Reading somebody else's handwriting is a little difficult. So like 5.2 section, or number 32, it mentions special areas of public regulation. We changed this in our Code of Ordinances, but it still mentions in here that we can regulate fortune telling and palmistry. We cannot. The First Amendment says we cannot, so we just need to remove it. Some of it is that simple, but you can tell we haven't been through it word by word in quite some time, so that's what we're trying to do. So I just wanted to point a couple of them out to you. Let's see. We have in chapter 10, amusements and entertainments, article 2 is adult entertainment. Going through this chapter, there's a lot of things that we don't define. I'm sure some of it is hard to define, but it needs to be. For instance, we go through and talk about how alcoholic beverages on the premises are prohibited. The chief would like it to specifically say that so are drugs of any sorts. Now that we have that differentiation between marijuana, hemp, CBD, he wants to add that in as well. to this. We regulate pretty specifically erotic dancing establishments, but we don't define what that is. So if we're going to regulate it, we need to define it as well. There's also, and again, this is all the directors that are sitting together talking about this, so it's been very helpful in that everybody's had a different point of view based on what they do as their job. So I think Mr. Kirk was still here at this point, and he said, well, $1,000 for an erotic dancing establishment is less than what we would charge a bar. So we want a higher application fee. And of course, you can create a higher application fee based on how much you're gonna have to regulate it. So we would like to increase that. There's a couple other things. The city attorney shall present the city's case in regards to any kind of license revocation or suspension. So this is what we've done the past several months, is go through, and like I said, I'm not gonna go through them word by word for every single thing. I think that would be not worth your time, but I just wanted to point out a few. Chapter 6, the alcohol ordinance, we will bring back to y'all soon at a workshop. I think will be best for that one because it will detail some of those abilities to deliver alcohol, and we need to put that in our code if that's something.
We actually, on the delivery of alcohol, the state law, we really need to have an ordinance adopted in November. And I've got one drafted, and it's kind of waiting back to hear from Kenny and Jessica as to which direction I want to go in. So we need to talk about that real soon.
So that's the permitting of delivery of.
Yeah, and if you don't want deliveries in Griffin, you still have to pass an ordinance prohibiting that. I don't know if you want that. The downside of that law is because you can only regulate alcohol activity within your jurisdiction. If you have a licensee within the city who can deliver, they've got to deliver within the city. They can't go out beyond the city limits to deliver in the county. Now, if they're a restaurant that delivers food, they might be delivering food in the county. Then he can't deliver the alcohol with it. And there's a lot of reluctance on behalf of these establishments to do any delivery if they're going to be fined in that respect. The other thing I keep hearing from other jurisdictions is the safety factor. If they're going to start delivering, it's like the pizza guy that gets bugs when he goes to the wrong house. So there's concern there as well. So we got to make a decision. Now, you can also prohibit the distribution, and everything has to be by the package, by the sealed package. So it's basically delivery of beer and wine. A package store, liquor store, that does sell distilled spirits can deliver sealed packages of distilled spirits unless you prohibit that. So
Is that in the
is this
city
something you
and
want
county?
the liquor stores doing or not? That's kind of the question.
Is that city and county or just to the city?
Well, I don't know what the county's gonna do. They handle their own alcohol regulations. But whatever you do is gonna be done inside your city limits. You can't give authority to somebody to go beyond your city limits. The Atlanta area says it's not gonna help. There's so many jurisdictions and jurisdictional lines up there that I think it's gonna be a mass confusion to try to.
That's what I was thinking. Unless we had a very similar ordinance to the county, I think it would cause a ton of confusion about you can deliver at 9:17, but you can't deliver at 9:21 because that's where.
Right, one side of the street may be in the city, the other side may be in the
Right.
county.
Okay. Okay.
But I think the reason for that is the legislature recognized that these are people you're licensing to engage in this activity in your town.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, that authority doesn't extend somewhere else.
Okay. So for instance, that's why we need to bring the alcohol ordinance back and discuss at a workshop, not something that you'll just see on the agenda without us coming back to you. Like I said, I'm not gonna go through these word by word on the things that we have found, but just know that those will be coming to you. The other thing is the Unified Development Code was adopted in 2008. It has been revised just sort of here and there as we've needed. Y'all remember infill design, all those kind of things that we've gone through. It has, from what I know, has not been reviewed in its entirety since it was adopted. It was also drafted by a consultant, which is fine, except that they don't know the city of Griffin, and it doesn't look like at times that they compared it very well with our code. So one of the reasons that we sort of held off on bringing any of these to you is because we're worried that when we get into the Unified Development Code, some of our code of ordinances will also need to be updated to make sure they match. For instance, in the charter and in the code, there's a provision in the charter about the ethics provisions for you all, but we've adopted a code now. We need to make sure that that code matches the charter. It will be very similar with the UDC. If we have information in the UDC about drainage or parking lots, and we need to make sure it matches chapter 50, which is floods. So we will have to sort of come back and forth with that. We don't want to bring you a bunch of stuff and then come back and have to do it again once we get through the UDC. So as we sort of go through that is when you'll start seeing these ordinances come to you to be revised. If you have questions about them once you see them, then of course we can handle that. And if it's something that we believe is going to be more of a discussion, then we'll bring it to you at a workshop. Does anybody have any questions about that so far? You're welcome to join us on the first Friday, next Friday. if you'd
First
like.
Friday
It's
at what
so
time?
fun. 8:30, and we normally go till about 11. Depending on everybody's mood, it can be real fun.
I think Commissioner Carter said it was late.
Sometimes I bring donuts, so there is that.
Oh, you gotta be there. You got the kid sprinkles on. All right, that's the last item on our agenda. Is there anything else the board member needs to bring up or say? Great job.